Canada imposes tariffs ranging from 250% to even 300% on certain U.S. dairy products. At first glance, this sounds like a severe blow to American farmers. But what if this narrative is just part of a broader performance designed to sway public opinion?
It's true that Canada's official tariff schedule lists duties as high as 270% on products like butter, yogurt, and powdered milk. However, these high tariffs only come into play after U.S. dairy exports exceed specific thresholds known as tariff rate quotas. In reality, these quotas are rarely, if ever, exceeded. For 3 years straight, the U.S. has exported over $1 billion worth of dairy products to Canada annually, without triggering those steep tariffs. Why? Because all shipments have remained within the quota limits, which are completely tariff-free. So while the massive tariffs exist on paper, they're rarely applied in practice. The communication strategy here is textbook. Present a real number, but strip away its context. While Trump wasn't wrong about the tariff rate itself, he failed to mention the condition that must be met for the tariff to apply, exceeding the quota. Think of it like this. If Canada allows the first 3 buckets of milk to enter duty-free, the 250% tariff only kicks in with the 4th. But U.S. dairy exports haven't reached that 4th bucket in years. Still, the claim made it sound like every gallon of American milk was being punished with exorbitant tariffs. This is how a fact can be used to inflame public opinion, even when the full truth tells a very different story. Naturally, one might wonder, if there's no actual tariff being applied, why don't companies export more milk to Canada? The answer lies in how these quotas are distributed. Most of the quota is allocated to Canadian dairy producers, who have little reason to import competing U.S. products. For example, last year, the quota for importing yogurt and buttermilk from the U.S. stood at 3.5 million kilograms. Yet, only 12% of that was used. The remaining 88% went untouched. Not because Canada blocked imports, but because the companies holding the quotas, like Saputo, Agropur, and Scotian Gold, had no interest in competing with their own production lines. The U.S. argues that Canada is using this quota system unfairly, allocating it to businesses that are unlikely to use it and therefore limiting market access. Canada, on the other hand, claims it's simply protecting its agricultural industry, an approach that's legal under international trade rules. In fact, this dispute went before a USMCA trade panel, which ultimately ruled in favor of Canada. Another issue complicating imports is the use of growth hormones like RBST in U.S. milk, something that's completely banned in Canada. This further discourages Canadian businesses from bringing in American dairy, even when it's tariff-free. From a numbers perspective, the dairy industry makes up only about 0.1% of the $700 billion trade between the two countries. Yet politically, it has become a symbol, used to ignite broader economic arguments. Trump's focus on milk may not be about milk at all. It could be a prelude to a much larger, more aggressive trade strategy. And now, that strategy appears to be taking shape. Rather than launching a new app or meme campaign, Trump has proposed a sweeping 20% global tariff on all imports, a move that's already sending shockwaves through the financial world and keeping economists up at night. This isn't just America First. It's more like a sequel to the infamous Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of the 1930s, a policy that played a key role in plunging the U.S. into the Great Depression. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, put it bluntly, "There's no optimistic outcome in this plan. It's a spectrum of negative scenarios. If enacted as proposed, the financial markets could face chaos even before the ink dries. The Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ have already begun to drop, like cars with no brakes. Zandi estimates that the unemployment rate could rise from today's 4% to over 7%, pushing the country into a significant recession. Even a less aggressive version of the plan, targeting specific countries, would still average a 15% tariff, enough to tip the economy toward the edge of recession. Conventional thinking says raising taxes increases revenue, but in this case, Zandi warns that the damage will hit before the first dollar is collected. As tariffs rise, unemployment follows. When jobs are lost, income drops, consumer spending falls, and businesses lose revenue. This leads to lower income and corporate tax receipts, while government spending surges, especially for unemployment benefits, food assistance programs, housing subsidies, and aid to farmers hit by foreign retaliation. Zandi drives the point home. Even if tariff revenues go up, the loss in all other taxes will likely outweigh it. Meanwhile, government expenses will explode. And it's not just the US that's nervous. Key trade partners are scrambling. Mexico, America's closest trading ally, has been sending diplomatic delegations to Washington almost weekly. Former Mexican Deputy Foreign Minister Julian Ventura has warned that tariffs damage investor confidence and consumer sentiment. If the US-Mexico supply chain collapses, the impact could affect 14 million jobs across North America. Canada is also on high alert. Ottawa has activated its emergency response strategy, something rarely seen in recent decades. The once strong US-Canada alliance is now under serious strain. After Trump dubbed April 2nd Liberation Day, claiming it would mark America's freedom from unfair trade practices, Wall Street reacted harshly. Stocks plummeted, investors fled, and economists rang the alarm bells. They compared the moment to the resurrection of Smoot-Hawley, a policy that helped drive the U.S. into the depths of the Great Depression. It's a tax policy that could eliminate millions of jobs, crash Wall Street, and drag the country to the brink of another crisis. So here's the real question. Is this leading to long-term prosperity or dragging the U.S. into an old-fashioned economic disaster dressed up as a bold new idea? While the American people face rising costs and financial instability, the man behind the plan seems unfazed. In a recent interview, Trump said he couldn't care less if his auto tariffs caused prices to spike. Liberation Day is almost here, but will it truly bring freedom and prosperity? Or just another financial shock, leaving ordinary citizens to foot the bill? As import tariffs rise from under 2% to levels not seen since 1947, American consumers may soon find themselves paying the price, not just at the grocery store or car dealership, but across the entire economy. Trump wants Americans to buy domestic cars, but what does that actually mean in practice? With soaring import tariffs, the cost of everyday goods, especially vehicles, is set to rise dramatically. The question is, how much are people willing to pay for this version of economic patriotism? Estimates suggest that new car prices could jump anywhere from $2,000 to $15,000 per vehicle. That's because most parts, raw materials, and electronic chips are sourced internationally. These tariffs don't just fail to protect jobs, they force consumers to shoulder the burden through higher prices. In the end, Trump's vision of an American car revival may look more like a mountain of long-term installment payments for working families. Canada, meanwhile, is left wondering what it did wrong. After signing what Trump once called the greatest trade deal ever, free from drug disputes and illegal immigration, focused only on wood and milk, Canada now finds itself in the crosshairs of a new round of tariffs. Is this punishment for some unknown offense, or simply part of Trump's strategy to always go bigger? Experts are sounding the alarm. These tariffs won't just affect North America. They could ripple through 90% of global trade. The likely result? A wave of retaliation, fractured supply chains, and skyrocketing inflation. Consumers in the U.S. will pay more for nearly everything, from cars to household goods, while the value of the dollar comes under threat. American businesses, squeezed by uncertainty and rising costs, will cut back on investments and production. The broader economy may soon find itself navigating dangerous waters. And it's not just about economics, it's about instability. Trump's trade policies shift as often as his public statements. One day it's global tariffs. The next, he's handing out exemptions to favored nations. Then, in the same breath, he demands that car companies keep prices low even as production costs surge. This erratic approach leaves companies frozen, unable to plan or invest. Consumers are left waiting for the next price hike, unsure of when or if the economy will stabilize. Without consistency, confidence collapses. So, does this economic plan deliver benefits or just chaos? What's clear is that prices will soar, but there's no real infrastructure or plan in place to rebuild domestic manufacturing at scale. Americans may pay more at the checkout, but the promised long-term gains remain invisible. Without a clear roadmap, Liberation Day could prove to be nothing more than an expensive illusion, one that leaves American households struggling under the weight of unrealistic promises and a looming recession. Businesses won't invest in a volatile market, and consumers will brace for rising prices day after day. Beyond the economy, the cultural battle between Trump and Hollywood has never really ended. In 2017, Meryl Streep stunned both Hollywood and Washington with a passionate speech at the Golden Globes. Accepting her Lifetime Achievement Award, she used the platform to call out what she saw as a pattern of cruelty in leadership, referring to Trump's public mocking of a disabled reporter. Though she never mentioned him by name, the message was unmistakable. When those in power resort to mockery and humiliation, they legitimize those same behaviors across society. Disrespect, she warned, invites more disrespect. Violence inspires violence. Trump, never one to hold back, responded quickly on Twitter, lashing out at Streep as overrated. Rather than calming the storm, his reaction ignited a firestorm of criticism and pushed public sympathy even further in her favor. It was a textbook case of Trump's combative media strategy backfiring. At the same time, public curiosity grew around the personal life of the first couple. Melania Trump remained largely silent throughout her husband's presidency, sparking speculation about their relationship. She delayed moving into the White House, citing her son's schooling, but rumors swirled about whether the delay reflected deeper distance. Even after moving in, Melania kept a low profile. She rarely attended political rallies or openly supported Trump's initiatives. One moment in particular stood out. During a visit to migrant child detention centers, she wore a jacket with the words, "I really don't care, do you?" A statement that, intentional or not, became symbolic of a broader lack of empathy at a time of public outrage over the administration's family separation policies. This wasn't just a fashion faux pas. It was a major PR disaster that damaged her public image and cast doubt on her commitment to the causes she claimed to champion, like her Be Best campaign against cyberbullying. The irony wasn't lost on the public, given Trump's own habit of posting aggressive and demeaning tweets. All of this raises deeper questions. Is Melania's quiet presence part of a deliberate strategy or simply self-preservation? And does her silence reflect unity or distance? Amid this personal and political drama, Trump's trade policies continued to shake the markets. Right after the closing bell, he announced a 25% tariff on all foreign-made cars. With over 6 million imported vehicles entering the U.S. annually, this wasn't a minor tweak. It was a seismic shift in the global auto supply chain. The market reacted immediately. CNBC reported sharp declines in auto stocks. General Motors saw its stock tumble over 5% in minutes. And it didn't stop with cars. Trump expanded the tariffs to include pharmaceuticals, a sector where the U.S. heavily depends on imports for key ingredients. According to the FDA, about 72% of active pharmaceutical components are sourced from abroad, primarily China and Ireland. Trump's reasoning? To bring drug manufacturing back to America. But this will come at a cost. Higher prices for critical medications, especially for seniors, low-income patients, and those with chronic conditions. Despite the potential consequences, Trump showed no urgency. He downplayed concerns, suggesting that any market disruptions would resolve themselves within days or weeks. But for millions of Americans relying on retirement accounts, IRAs, and long-term investments, this wasn't a short-term dip. It was a threat to their financial future. Then came Signalgate, an incident involving senior officials allegedly sharing sensitive military operations through unsecured group chats. Texts showed direct coordination and specific launch times, potentially breaching the Espionage Act and compromising national security. Trump dismissed the scandal as a witch hunt, deflecting responsibility. Yet the leaked messages included precise timestamps and military actions that could have placed missions at risk. In the same briefing, the president abruptly switched gears, veering into a monologue about whales, coal, and wind power. He suggested whales were acting strangely, perhaps because of renewable energy projects, and praised coal as both powerful and clean, touting it as the future of American energy. This sudden pivot left viewers and investors bewildered. Was the administration prioritizing national security, economic recovery, or fossil fuel revival? Mixed signals like these undermine confidence, stall investment, and confuse both domestic and international markets. At the same time, new projections from the Atlanta Federal Reserve painted a bleak picture. GDP growth for Q1 2025 is expected to shrink by 1.8%. Other models are even more dire, warning of contractions up to 3%. In the previous quarter, under the former administration, U.S. GDP grew by 2.3%. Now, the outlook has shifted drastically. With inflation rising and growth slowing, the country teeters on the edge of stagflation, one of the most difficult economic conditions to escape. As pressure builds within the U.S., allies like Canada and the European Union are expressing concern. Major international companies are holding back investments, awaiting clarity on America's long-term economic direction. Could we be witnessing a quiet realignment on the global stage? Are long-standing alliances beginning to fracture? Meanwhile, pop culture adds fuel to the fire. A single joke from comedian Chris Rock recently ignited a storm on American social media. In under 10 minutes, his performance skewered Trump's presidency, comparing it to a chaotic reality show. The video quickly went viral, amassing millions of views and triggering a flood of memes. Within hours, it became one of the most talked about moments in American digital culture. Rock didn't stop at humor. He dug deep. He poked fun at Trump's bankrupt Atlantic City casinos, highlighting financial failures rarely discussed in the mainstream. He revisited infamous moments like the altered hurricane map incident and Trump staring directly at a solar eclipse, reminding the public of the surreal nature of past headlines. The backlash was immediate. Trump lashed out on Truth Social, calling Rock disrespectful and unfunny. But online, the reaction was the opposite. A tidal wave of memes, parodies, and commentary spread across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Even Melania Trump wasn't spared. Old footage of her swatting away Trump's hand went viral again. Searches for her name surged by 450% in just one day. The public's fascination with her cold demeanor reignited, especially in contrast to the chaos unfolding around the presidency. Then came the next bombshell. Trump announced a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, effective immediately. The reaction was swift and brutal. Wall Street spiraled into panic. The Dow Jones fell 1.48%, the S&P 500 dropped 1.76%, and the Nasdaq plunged 2.64%. Bitcoin tumbled 8%, and the crypto market followed in free fall. This wasn't a minor correction. It was full-scale investor panic. The markets interpreted Trump's move not as policy, but as chaos. The unpredictability of these economic decisions is triggering fears of inflation, recession, and prolonged instability. And the consequences go beyond the stock market. Everyday Americans are already feeling the impact. Imported goods, cars, smartphones, appliances, groceries, are becoming more expensive. Tariffs may be imposed on foreign companies, but the cost is passed on to U.S. consumers. Worse yet, retaliation from trade partners is guaranteed. Canada and Mexico purchase billions in U.S. agricultural exports. If they strike back, and they already are, American farmers could lose critical markets overnight. Major industries like automotive, tech, and retail will also suffer. Companies reliant on materials and products from Canada and Mexico face a dilemma: raise prices or cut costs. Either way, job losses are on the table. As profit margins shrink, layoffs could rise. Manufacturing jobs are particularly vulnerable. And how did Trump respond to this crisis? By telling American farmers to cheer up. Canada and Mexico weren't amused. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wasted no time. In response, Canada announced its own 25% tariff on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods, targeting key exports like automobiles, agriculture, and consumer products. Mexico, too, hit back. Its trade minister threatened mirrored tariffs and announced negotiations with China and Europe to replace American suppliers. This could devastate U.S. businesses dependent on exports, with billions in sales potentially lost. The harsh reality is that Canada and Mexico don't need the U.S. the way they once did. If they pivot to China and the European Union, America's dominance in North American trade could erode. Trump argues this will make America stronger, but economists warn the opposite, that these policies could spark long-term economic decline. If instability continues, investors may pull capital from the U.S. and move it to more predictable markets. Supply chains will be disrupted. Key materials from Canada and Mexico will become more expensive. Domestic production costs will rise, inflation will accelerate, and if prices spiral while jobs disappear, a recession is inevitable. There's also the risk of the U.S. losing its regional trade leadership altogether. If Canada and Mexico deepen ties with other global powers, Washington's influence over North American commerce will shrink. Trump is betting on economic nationalism, but if the gamble fails, it's everyday Americans who will pay the price. And Canada isn't finished. In addition to the tariffs, it's playing a strategic card few have fully considered: energy. Canada is the #1 supplier of crude oil to the U.S., with most of it coming from Alberta's oil sands. Refineries in the U.S. Midwest are specifically designed to process this heavy Canadian crude, not oil from Russia or the Middle East. Canada also ranks as the second largest provider of natural gas to the U.S., with a vast pipeline network that's become essential to American industry. If Canada were to restrict this supply in retaliation, the consequences could be disastrous. Their strategy is already in motion. Canada's response is structured in 2 phases. Phase 1, a 25% tariff on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods, focusing on essentials like food, clothing, and household items, hitting American families where it hurts most. Phase 2 is even more aggressive, $125 billion in tariffs on U.S. core industries, automobiles, electric vehicles, steel, aluminum, and agriculture. These measures don't just raise prices, they threaten to destabilize entire economic sectors. The auto industry is especially vulnerable. For decades, the U.S. and Canada have shared a deeply integrated automotive supply chain. From batteries to engines to frames, components cross borders multiple times before a vehicle is complete. Disrupting that system means rising costs for American automakers and rising prices for consumers. Electric vehicles are at even greater risk. Materials like lithium, nickel, and cobalt, essential for EV batteries, are sourced from Canada. If those supplies are cut, the U.S. could lose its competitive edge in the global EV race. And Canada isn't just reacting. It's preparing for a future beyond U.S. trade. Officials are actively seeking new deals with Europe, China, and South Korea. If they succeed, it could permanently reshape the North American economic map. Surprisingly, Canadians overwhelmingly support this tougher stance. Recent polls show over 70% back the government's retaliation. The mood is clear. If attacked economically, Canada is prepared to hit back. And they're not doing it alone. Canadian industries are exploring new markets. Politicians are pushing for deeper integration with the EU and Asia-Pacific to reduce dependency on the US. This marks a significant shift. Canada is no longer positioning itself as a passive trade partner. It's stepping up, forming new alliances, and recalibrating its economic future. If the US continues down this path without a clear, long-term strategy, it may find itself not only in a recession, but isolated. The landscape of global trade is changing, and America's next move could determine whether it leads the future or is left behind.